Notes from around training camps in the NFL. Tyreek Hill gets a new contract. Brandon Aiyuk trade might still be alive. Some sleeper teams involved there. Some injuries and a lot more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love our everydayers, and we love it when you hit that subscribe button. So please do so now. Helps us out tremendously on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. Sports stops sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every summer, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Why do wide receivers, why does that position produce so much news around the NFL? What is going on there? Is it the diva mentality? Is it just because every team needs 9 of them? Is that why? What's going on?
I think so to some degree. I mean, I think it's a very rich position right now. You know, like I often talk about, the biggest discrepancy to me is D-line over O-line in the league. But I think behind that is wide receiver over corners because there's just so many of them. And, you know,
so
you agree with that?
It's interesting because defensive linemen are so valuable. That means offensive linemen are super valuable because you got to protect the most valuable asset, which is your quarterback. And it would make sense that a quarterback needs playmakers to throw to, so wide receivers are valuable. But if wide receivers are super valuable, then the cornerbacks that cover them should also be extremely valuable. Seems like the corner position's dropping while the wide receiver position is gaining in value. And wide receivers almost leapfrogged everybody except for maybe defensive end to be the number 3 position valued in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because of defensive scheme. You know, that their scoring is down, so defensive coordinators collectively are doing their job well. And they've gone to a lot more 4-man rush, zone, too high stuff that my corners don't have to be Darrelle Revis. And I'm still keeping teams down. But the CD Lambs of the world and the Tyreek Hills of the world feast against that stuff. And if you can get one, you pay them. And you're right, though. There's also 3 of them on the field at all times. And while the college ranks, you know, feeds us a lot of receivers, you really would like to have 4 quality ones. You know, I mean, like right now, my Steelers have 1. You know, like that's a real shortage compared to most teams. And I also think you're right that striking while the iron is hot is important, too. And that position is hot in the financial world. And I think that there is, to be a good receiver, well, you don't not have to be, but I do think that there's some selfishness and diva-ness to that position, which is okay. You know, that I might be more about myself on an island than the team. I mean, collectively, I'm not saying everyone, of course.
You have to be driven in a certain way to run routes 60 times, but know that you're only going to be targeted on those at most a fifth of the time and still be dialed in and grinding every route.
And it's frustrating that I did my job. I whipped this corner and the quarterback went somewhere else, or threw it at my feet, or you know, got deflected, or you know, like I'm out here doing my stuff, but I'm so dependent on others.
Yeah, some mental toughness that could manifest itself in other ways when you're not actually on the field, I think is what it is. By the way, Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins reached an agreement on a restructured contract worth $90 million over the next 3 years. That's $30 million per. 85 or 65 million of that is guaranteed. And the scoop on that comes from Marcel Louis Jacques from a Miami reporter. I'm relaying this from the Adam Schefter tweet about it. So adding on to his already 1 year that he had left. So that's a 4-year total of around $106.5 million for Tyreek Hill, who, by the way, were you surprised to see that players in the NFL top 100 rated Tyreek Hill number 1 player in the NFL over Patrick Mahomes, who's, by the way, number 4. So he wasn't the only one ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Made some waves this week. I don't pay a ton of attention to those lists, but Tyreek Hill, number 1 player in the NFL, according to his peers.
Well, Mahomes not being 1 is ludicrous. I mean, let's just put that out there real quick. I mean, that's it, let alone 4.
One quick note on that. So apparently this was voted on so long ago, like December of last year. So this is a 2023 ranking, even though they're talking about top players of 2024. This was voted on in December, apparently. And the Chiefs had a little weird end to the season. I think they had just lost to the Raiders
on Christmas.
Yeah. So I think maybe there's a reason why the list might look a little funky, recency bias that was now a long time ago. So the list is actually, how did it end in 2023 regular season, more so than projecting 2024. Flawed list after flawed list. And to be honest with you, NFL players are bad at rating each other. I've learned.
Yeah, they are, especially if they don't play against each other. I mean, like, if you're, we can have this conversation a ton, but they do a lot of work on the player they're going to play, or the team they're going to play against that week. And if you're not on the schedule, or you're not buddies with them, or you're not studying, the defensive tackles in the other conference that you never see, you really aren't that good a judge. I mean, if you play against them, I think there's no one to better judge. But
or they're not on Monday Night Football when you're actually watching, because you're not watching all the games on Sunday every week because you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, do you really think the Denver Broncos know how good a defensive tackle Derek Brown is? In Carolina, I mean, you never see him if you don't play against him. You really wouldn't know. I actually don't have a problem with Tyreek being 2, not 1. I think
2 is probably the right spot. As my guy Eric Crocker, my co-host of Locked On 49ers, said, if you're an opposing defensive coordinator after Patrick Mahomes, who scares you the most? It might be Tyreek Hill. Lamar Jackson, obviously, and Josh Allen, and there's some other guys in the league, but Tyreek Hill's right there.
I've been saying this a lot this off season, that I think he's the scariest wide receiver for defensive coordinators since Randy Moss. And I think when we look at the all-time pecking order of wideouts, he should be higher than people give him credit for.
He's climbing.
I think he might be 3. I think it's Rice, it's Moss, and then I love Larry Fitzgerald, and he's a friend. I'd rather play against Larry than Tyreek. I'd rather play against almost anybody. I mean, he's frightening as could be.
If we're talking about wide receiver value, and here's another part of this that is interesting to me. The Chiefs did stumble offensively last year, and they've had trouble replacing Tyreek Hill, but they're still winning Super Bowls.
And they're still trying.
How valuable is the best receiver in the NFL if it doesn't matter if you lose him and you still win Super Bowls?
Well, that's why Mahomes should be 1.
Right.
Because if you didn't have him, and none of that would have mattered, in my opinion.
It should go Mahomes, Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great honor for Tyreek Hill. Real quick on him, though. So is everyone just going to ask for a new contract now?
Yes.
Is that it? I mean,
that's kind of where I'm at with the 49ers. We've talked a lot about this. So Trent Williams wants a new contract, right? Brandon Aiyuk wants a new contract. They just gave a little bit more money to Christian McCaffrey, although running back money is not as much as wide receiver or offensive tackle money. And so it's like, okay, so every guy who's up for a contract wants the most money. And as soon as that guy gets the most money, then the actual best player is going to say that and say, well, I need to be the best. I need to be the most now because I'm the best. I'm better than that guy. So I need more money. So it's a little bit of a runaway train right now. And GMs and teams aren't willing to play hardball. And we're seeing a couple of teams, maybe it's the Cowboys and 49ers right now, they're starting to look at this thing. And we're like, well, look, we can't really do that. Because for the Cowboys, they just have 3 guys that are at the 3 most expensive positions in the league that are up at the same time. And the 49ers just have too many stars to pay. And they have a quarterback contract looming too. And they're already asking really important players on their team to take pay cuts, but then they're going to pay one guy more. And so I think it just starts to get a little bit interesting and how sustainable is it? There's a lot of really good wide receivers coming in. The wide receiver one is really the one where it's like, I feel like there might be a fraction in the league where some teams say, nah, we're going cheaper at wide receiver. And other teams are like, no, we're going to pay 2 star receivers, not just 1.
Yeah, right. Like I'm excited to see T. Higgins on the open market. I mean, he might make close to this kind of money with people competing for him. And I do think there could be a team. The Packers are sort of doing this. I mean, I think the Steelers are another one that could maybe pull it off of, I'm just drafting one on day 2 every year.
It's the way to go. But it's hard. See, here's the problem with wide receiver. It takes a little time and there's going to be some misses. So you have to start early. If you need a wide receiver today, you can't just go throw 1 second-round pick at it and like, man, I hope we got the next Devontae Adams.
Right. It takes some time to do that, pull that off. Right.
Yeah. And so I think that's maybe where we're at with this. And so teams that have the opportunity to develop and draft and develop, I think they'll be in front of this thing and, maybe even be able to trade wide receivers too. So I think we're not done talking about wide receivers because the money's getting pretty crazy right now. But yeah, like it's almost too easy to be an agent and a GM these days because they don't fight enough. It's almost
right.
I want the most.
Seems like
okay, here's the most, and then that's the end of the negotiation.
Yeah. Again, I mean, we just see this at other positions. Like Tyreek's contract wasn't up. He just wants more money because he's good.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting era of the NFL. Business is good. Cap's going up. Can it continue to go up enough to where it doesn't hurt teams at all? To just say, cool, yeah, you want the most, you're the best. Here's the most.
Collectively, that's kind of what they're telling us so far.
Yep. Looks like that way. One fight, though, that is continuing to happen is Brandon Aiyuk's contract with the 49ers. Report out of San Francisco that actually a trade might still be alive. Some mystery teams involved there. Puka Nacua injured, some signings, and some more camp battles as well around the NFL. Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. When your schedule is packed with kids, activities, big work projects, and so much more, and you know that there's something that's going to bother you in your pocket all day, every day too, even when you think you have a little bit of free time, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when you know exactly what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for that sometimes. But when you feel like you have no time to yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are as important as ever. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched to a licensed therapist, and if you don't hit it off with the therapist, that's okay. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So according to Matt Miyoko, NBC Sports Bay Area, one of the longtime beat writers for the 49ers, who has been saying, kind of like what I've been saying, like, no way, there's not going to be a Brandon Aiyuk trade. Suddenly he has flipped, which is very interesting to me.
It is interesting.
He says that maybe more than ever now, an Aiyuk trade could maybe potentially be there. And the interesting part to me is that he said, and the ball might be in Brandon Aiyuk's court. And there's been some other reports that the teams that have been interested lately are the Cleveland Browns, which is kind of a new mystery team, and the New England Patriots. And we've already heard, Washington Commanders, because he's buddies with Jaden Daniels. Your Pittsburgh Steelers have been a team that's been talked about, and there's potentially some pre-draft talks there. The Cleveland one is very interesting. I understand why the Patriots would want a top receiver because they don't have one, and they got a young quarterback, and they're trying to develop something there. And Aiyuk's still 26 years old, and you're building with a guy. You're not just adding an old guy. But the thing that being in Aiyuk's court tells me this, Matt, and tell me if I'm wrong here. The way I read it is that the 49ers, don't want to budge from their number. The number they budgeted for Brandon Aiyuk is the number that makes sense for their team build going forward. They're not going to go higher. That number is not big enough for Brandon Aiyuk, whether that number is, it's probably in the 20. Aiyuk wants 30. They're offering 26, 27, 28, something like that. Like that's kind of
not $1 million apart. It's
reading the tea leaves. It could be $2 to $4 million apart per year where they're at right now. Neither side wants to budge. And it being in Aiyuk's court means that the 49ers have found a team that offered them what they're willing to take in a trade, and that team is also willing to pay Brandon Aiyuk. And they informed Brandon Aiyuk of this. So he can say, okay, I am going to pack my bags and go to Cleveland. I'm going to pack my bags and go to New England because you found this deal that satisfies you. They're willing to satisfy me contractually. That's what it tells me if the ball's in Brandon Aiyuk's court. Because otherwise, how would the ball be in his court?
I haven't thought about it in that kind of detail, but you're the host of Locked On 49ers, so this is right up your alley. But although I've talked Aiyuk to death in my Steeler circles as well, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, if you could either sign for 26, 27, whatever here, or you could go to New England and rebuild, or you could go to Cleveland and see how that goes, or whatever. I can understand that. Real quick on his value, and I'll put it in Steeler terms. Because the Steelers don't have any quarterbacks under contract last year, I've said all offseason that the Steelers' first-round pick can't be involved in any trade for anyone, even if it's Jerry Rice. You know what I mean? Like, you have to keep that in your back pocket. But I've come around on it that I would give the first-round pick straight up for Aiyuk, which is probably 20 like it is every year. But if you're the Patriots, that very well could be the first pick of the draft. Right. And quarterback teams are going to give you a lot.
Another wrinkle from this report, which makes some sense on one level, but then at the same time, it's like, well, why not just keep Aiyuk? It said it was that there's probably a player involved, and it's not just for 2025 picks, because obviously the 49ers are in a Super Bowl window and want to win now. And my response to that is, well, just keep Aiyuk and trade and tag and trade him in the offseason, because then you still get 2025 picks, but you got Aiyuk for the year instead of whatever player you're getting back. That means if you're getting a player, you're not getting as good as of a pick either with him. And, like Amari Cooper in a third.
That's what I was about to say. That's what interests me with the Browns.
Yeah.
Like that the Browns have 3 receivers under contract. Not that Elijah Moore is making a ton of money, but they traded for all those guys. They just gave Judy money. I don't know where they get their money from, by the way. They have a lot of expensive contracts, including the worst contract in the league, and they still are able to buy anything they want. That being said, I would think Amari Cooper gets involved in that deal. And if I'm the Browns, I think Cooper's up after this year. I'll give you Cooper in a 3. And if the Niners are just to the point where I'm done with this, I mean, you're a distraction now. Cooper can help us win. Rent him for a year, pick up a 3rd in the process, or a conditional pick, or a 2nd, or whatever. That doesn't sound insane to me.
And that's why, to me, I'm like, no, he's under contract. Aiyuk can play this year out, knowing it's a contract year. You tag and trade him, you're getting at least a 2nd, and you got Aiyuk anyway, who already knows the offense. So you're ahead.
I hear you.
So I don't get it unless like New England's like, all right, we'll give you a 1st because we think we're going to be good. We're the next Houston Texans. And if I'm the 49ers, I'd be like, okay, I'll take that gamble.
That's what I was going to ask you. Would you just take the Patriots 1st straight up?
Yeah.
I think I would in a heartbeat. Yeah.
I would do that today for sure. But there's not, Steelers 1st would be an interesting one because I think that's fair. And
it won't be top 10. It won't be bottom 10.
You wouldn't be able, you would lose a pretty good player. And I don't think he's a necessity for the 49ers. They could win without Brandon Aiyuk, which is an interesting dichotomy because as good as he is, they could get by without Brandon Aiyuk. That it's not like the whole thing doesn't work without him. But at the same time, he makes you better. And then there's depth on top. Yeah. Debo's going to miss some games, and Kittle's going to miss some games. You need Brandon Aiyuk. And so, yeah, I still don't think it's possible, but, it's another longtime beat reporter that also didn't think that a trade was likely at all. Seems to think it's possible. And something tells me there's some very serious conversations going on behind the scenes right now.
So I can't help myself because we've thrown this out a few times on Steeler Nation Radio, because all of a sudden the Steelers have an extra offensive lineman. They have 10 guys that are worthy of a roster spot. They'll almost always keep 7 or 9. I mean, last year they traded Green and Dotson at this time, and they have a lot of guards. So what if I offered you James Daniels, who, if people don't know, is younger than you think. His contract's up after the year. He's an average starting guard, maybe slightly above, and a 2.
It's a fair offer. The 49ers, I think, like their interior guys more than anyone else in the world.
Okay.
Rookie 3rd-round guard, Dominic Pooney, has been one of the stars.
You were mentioning him, yeah.
So I think for that reason, even though it's a fair trade, I would say, keep Aiyuk, tag and trade. You might still get that 2nd from the Steelers next offseason or something.
I mean, I guess my point is, other than a receiver coming back,
offensive line is a good place to start, and maybe because Daniel
right tackle or
2, maybe the 49ers would like that. I thought the 49ers should be interested in free agency when he was a free agent. He's
been pretty good.
Yeah,
but all of a sudden they got too many guards.
All of a sudden they got too many. Yeah, but an offensive lineman could potentially be a player that comes back. Maybe another defensive lineman. I don't know, but
We've been talking about this to death. I mean, especially me in Pittsburgh and especially you with the Niners, but it's not going away and it's still a story.
Yeah, timing's odd too.
Yeah, it is.
And a team that wants to get him in needs to get him into camp and get him ready for their team too. So time's ticking on that one.
Yeah, right. Like if I'm on the receiving end, I want him now. I want to at least get him on the field before, maybe even a preseason game a little.
Yeah, get some preseason snaps, get some training camp practice in. Puka Nacua is out. Looks like a short-term injury, Matt. I've got a question for you, and this is selfishly about my keeper fantasy team. Who would you keep, Garrett Wilson or Puka Nacua? We'll get to that question next. We'll talk about some other transactions in the NFL as well. Coming up. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. I love sports. You love sports. That's why we're all here hanging out, talking sports. But as the playoffs wind down in the NHL and the NBA, and sometimes there's a summer lull, even though right now it's an Olympic summer, so there is tons of ways to bet still at FanDuel. Olympics, Major League Baseball every single day. But all you have to do is open up the app at any time and dream up any bets you want anytime you're in the mood, including NFL bets on the 2024 season. Tons of props and futures there. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So it looks like Puka Nacua, it's not going to hamper him into the season, but Puka Nacua got banged up a little bit last year. Cooper Kupp has gotten banged up. That big slot position, you get hit a lot in the NFL. A couple of questions here. One, is Puka Nacua, because of his rookie season, being overrated? Because is Cooper Kupp going away anytime soon? And is there enough targets for both of those guys? Could there be a sophomore slump for Puka Nacua, which is kind of why I've been leaning towards Garrett Wilson as the keeper in my fantasy league. But now there's a report that Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson's connection in camp has hit a bit of a rough patch, and they're actually kind of shouting at each other, apparently, on the sideline last week. And so I don't know what to think now.
I understand. I totally do. And I think after studying him, reading about him, I think Nacua is a much better football player than I initially gave him credit for. I thought he was a product of the system. Frankly, it was kind of a Brock Purdy situation. Like, anybody could do that. And then you start watching him like, oh, he's really good at his craft. And the coaches are utilizing what he does well. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's called good coaching. Side note, like, remember when we used to give Bruce Arians a hard time for getting quarterbacks killed? Luck, Roethlisberger, Palmer. Yeah. The McVay offense is really hard on wide receivers. Like, they do fullback stuff, coming back and crack back on edge guys. And I mean, I love McVay, but I think we at least need to acknowledge that his receivers take more of a beating than anybody else. I mean, they get tackled in the middle of the field. Right.
We saw Bobby Slowick last year, those condensed formations.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Dell was like 150 pounds. Like, oh, yeah, Tank Dell, guess what? You might have to hit this defensive end on this play. And he got hurt.
He got hurt. So I just pulled up my redraft receiver ranks for you. I have Wilson 7, Nacua 9. And I'm not going to change them because of this injury. It sounds like it's something to monitor. It's not nothing, but I don't think it's going to be a massive injury for Nacua. And if I were to do dynasty ranks, I would have Wilson even a higher discrepancy. I mean, and none of that's a knock on Wilson or Nacua at all. I just think Wilson's in A to A+ talent. And to me, I know that people are probably like, just for fantasy reasons, well, what if Rodgers gets hurt or retires? He was still really productive without him last year in the worst system ever. I mean, it's not going to be Zach Wilson again if it's not Rodgers.
I'm with you. So I'm staying on Wilson. The fact that Puka Nacua is banged up, and I'm going to kind of just bypass the New York Jets weirdness and think that, look, he's that talented and he's the number one guy. Aaron Rodgers is going to find him. They'll figure that out. Whatever.
Tyrod Taylor would find him.
Right. Exactly.
the quarterback to be named later next year will find him.
One of those teams that faded receivers and it didn't quite work out great for him is the Tennessee Titans. Obviously they made the switch from AJ Brown and used that draft pick to draft Treylon Burks. Didn't quite work out like the Minnesota Vikings when they flipped Diggs for Justin Jefferson. And now they have an injury to DeAndre Hopkins, but they didn't sign a receiver. They signed Quandre Diggs, a safety, and they were apparently in the safety market. They already brought in Jamal Adams, and then they were kicking the tires on Justin Simmons, who's still out there, by the way. And I don't know if it's because his price hasn't dropped. And man, the safety position right now is definitely one of those that is starting to. We talk about the corners that aren't maybe making as much money. The safety market is like the new running back market as far as just guys are having a tough time getting paid. And there's a lot of good ones around the NFL, but Titans signed Quandre Diggs, and he's a good player. And it's crazy that these safeties, it's like the only position in the NFL you can be this good and still unsigned in the NFL in August.
Really interesting. Yeah. And I can't believe Justin Simmons is still unsigned. It still flabbergasts me. And Diggs has had a very underrated career. He's a good player, I think, still. And Tennessee was as aggressive as anyone this offseason, including these latest moves. The wide receiver stuff you mentioned. Now Hopkins is banged up, but I wonder, and again, I mean, when you analyze this front office, are they buying guys on the 13th hole of the course and paying 7th hole money? You know what I mean? Like, none of these guys are ascending.
That's true. And
even Ridley.
I think they're just trying to be a competitive football team.
Yeah.
And they're utilizing what resources they have to get the guys they have. I don't know how much, and is there a dollar amount on here for Quandre Diggs?
I'm sure he's not breaking the bank.
I'm sure it's very cheap and probably so it's $5 million or up to $5 million 1 year deal. It looks like.
Yeah, well, I mean that could be decent, but I just all their guys they sign are brand name dudes that I think maybe Joe average fan that knows their name thinks they're better players than 32 NFL or 31 NFL GMs think they are.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that could absolutely be the case.
I don't think anybody was bagging Jamal Adams' door,
Right. Inside, he's a big reclamation project with Jamal Adams, who by the way doesn't like. Some teams are asking him to play linebacker. He doesn't want to do it, which I think is a huge mistake on his part.
It's kind of what he does anyways.
Gain 10 pounds, be a weak side backer, fly around, make plays.
Yeah. Pattern your game after Owosa Koromora.
A linebacker who can cover a little bit makes more money than a safety these days. So
yeah. The problem is he's still not good enough cover guy.
Well, for a linebacker, he's okay. But
he's okay, yeah. He's also a good blitzer. But
what are you Dan Graziano sounds a little bit different than Matt Williamson when it comes to
I saw this
Fields versus Russell Wilson. So I want to get your thoughts on this really quick because we talked about Justin Fields versus Russell Wilson, and you thought, it's Russell Wilson's kind of got it in the bag. It's not really a competition, even though he hasn't been able to do much in camp. And maybe that's all this is you see one guy and you don't see the other. And, pretty good reports out of camp from Justin Fields. Dan Graziano went as far as to say that Fields is actually the leader for QB1 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you see it that way?
It's interesting. I think Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers ran with this as well and just, can't help but pump it. But I'm going to be on his show today. I'm recording a couple hours after we're done just to chat Steelers, and I was last week too. And I guess a lot of people liked it. So anyway, I'm going to be chatting Steelers with Chris here in a couple hours. I've watched 95% of all these guys' snaps in practice, and I frankly don't think it's particularly close. But for people that haven't paid attention, Wilson did strain his calf doing the conditioning drills, so right before camp, he strained his calf. And frankly, if they were playing the next day, he would have dressed and been the starter. But he's been very slow to get back in team stuff, the 11-on-11, because they don't want him getting stepped on. But he's doing individual stuff. He's throwing after practice. Today, Monday, is an off day for the Steelers. I'm betting, and I said this on the air, that I think starting Tuesday, tomorrow, he will be back to being full go and running with the ones. And he's on the field a lot better than Fields. I mean, he's in total command. All the changes he's making, his red zone stuff, his accuracy. However, I heard Warren Sharp talking about this, and I think it applies to the Steelers more than any team out there, that the least efficient play by EPA in the NFL last year was throwing at or behind the line of scrimmage. And Wilson did a ton of that. Now, I think that's a lot of Sean Payton, but Wilson has a driver and a putter. He doesn't have the irons don't come out very often. You know what I mean?
Iron game. Yeah. Short game,
right.
We're throwing a moon ball.
Exactly. And throwing at or behind the line of scrimmage, the NFL has caught up to that RPO stuff and just attacks it for very little gain.
Well, the thing is Justin Fields isn't good over the middle of the field in the intermediate area either.
He isn't. But why I brought up Sharp is what the other thing he said, though, is the most efficient play in football right now is a quarterback scramble.
Well, he does have
that. You know, and watching him run in person is really something, BP.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when he opens it up at that size, it's like, wow. Or near the goal line, he's hard to deal with.
I mean, that's where I'm at with Justin Fields, too. Is seeing him come out and was like, how do you, like, this guy's too physically gifted. That, like, his ability to throw a deep ball, his arm talent, and then his ability to run at his size, this is a pretty rare specimen in this day and age in the NFL. You don't see those guys with those traits fail very often. So you'd have to be really bad everywhere else to fail. And he's been pretty bad everywhere else. But can you just get a little bit better to hit that median at that stuff? And as you grow as a veteran, get kind of better and better and better at the short game in the middle of the field and the intermediate stuff, while having this ability to run and the ability to go over the top and play action, hit some big plays too. And seeing him throw to George Pickens, I think that's a perfect combination. Like, that's exact receiver he needs, a guy who can go get it like that. So I'm still intrigued by Justin Fields, but definitely more skeptical than I was a couple years ago.
So last note on that. I mean, to Fields' credit, with Wilson out this whole time, he's gotten better. I mean, it's clearly he is better on the field yesterday when I watched him than 2 weeks ago when I watched him. His ball's coming out better. His legs and arm are married together. It's not a lot of goofy stuff. Yeah, he misses throw. He's not as pinpoint as Wilson, but he has gotten better. And they play, like most teams, they're going to play their first preseason game. It's Friday. I'll be there. And I doubt there's any chance Wilson plays in that game. Fields will probably play a lot. And lastly, like, I bet a lot of us non-Steeler listeners are going, I would rather play against Wilson than Fields.
Yes. And
you know what I mean? Just for one game.
If I'm stopping on the channel, I would stop to watch the Fields-led Steelers offense. If it's the Russell Wilson-led Steelers offense, I might turn the channel and see who else is playing. You know?
Right.
I'm kind of rooting for Fields in that way, just from a viewer prospect.
I mean, just running quarterback power with him, I mean, is nuts.
Yeah, run Fields.
Tight ends on the field, and, you know.
Then you can always bring Wilson back.
Mm-hmm. No, I've said this 1,000 times. Wilson is a starter. I firmly believe that. But the fact that all those things I said, at least I'll peek under the rock that maybe it's closer than I think. But
maybe
I don't
it
really
is actually a competition, or it has become a competition where it wasn't going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And Russell Wilson has left that door cracked open just enough for Fields to kick his way in.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Tomlin could swing the two of them, rotate or situational, or, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem like Wilson be game for that.
I saw a clip of another little scrap in Steelers camp, and Tomlin.
There's been a bunch.
Tomlin clearly does his best to break it up as a coach and loves it at the same time.
Yes, he could try a little harder to break them up.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Matt and I back tomorrow, breaking down training camps around the NFL, all the latest news. And we're going to start looking into teams and how things could go wrong. What could derail teams in the 2024 season, division by division. Talk to you then, right here, Peacock and Williamson.